If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedmann.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Jim Jacobs. He's the author of Driving Lessons for Life, Thoughts on Navigating Your Road to Personal Growth, published by Aviva Publishing. Jim is also a certified Daring Way facilitator, teaching and leading in the work of Dr. Brene Brown. He's a professional speaker, counselor, professional coach, and marriage educator, as well as being a featured contributor at Biz Catalyst 360 Degrees. Trained in psychology and social work, Jim loves to help people dare mighty things, rise strong, and live more authentic and less perfect, wholehearted lives. It's always exciting to interview one of my Aviva Publishing authors. So, Jim, what an absolute pleasure it is to welcome you to the show, and thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Susan, thank you so very much. It is such a pleasure and a treat to be with you today.
Yes, it's always exciting, as I say, to have my own authors. When they've got something significant to say, I really like to interview them if I can. I know that we're going to have fun together. In your book, The Driving Lessons for Life, and I know you brought out a second version or a number 2 version that's coming out shortly. Yeah. In the introduction, you say, are you driving your life or is your life driving you? I just absolutely love that question. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Thank you for asking. And by the way, that second book is also published by Aviva Publishing and comes out next week. And I'm so thankful for your support and help. This whole thing came about because in my over 20 years of experience working with people, you really see that there are people just being knocked around by life, that life is really driving them. Too often, we're just knocked around by the negativity in our world, by what's expected of us in our jobs. We're hustling to one place to the next without really living our lives. I'm just advocating that we get back in the driver's seat and really learn those principles of how to live a successful life, to live wholehearted, to be brave. Too many of us are heading down wrong, dusty dirt roads and not finding the fulfillment and joy that we want in our relationships, in our careers, in our marriages, in our hobbies and things we do to enjoy life. And I'm just hopeful to get people on a more joyful ride, more success, more happiness, more wholehearted living.
And I love the fact that you're using that metaphor that life is like driving a car. It was fascinating just going through the book, and you were right on with every little thing. So I hope our listeners are going to pick up a copy of that. We'll put that in the show notes as well, Jim. So why do you think that we feel that it's so hard for us to really do our best? What is it that's standing in our way?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking. You mentioned in the intro that I'm a certified Daring Way facilitator. And through the work of Brene Brown, we've just learned so much about wholehearted living, living with courageousness, and being more vibrant and authentic and accepting people. As part of my work, facilitating her work, I kind of stumbled upon this interesting dilemma that I've been researching over the past years. And hopefully maybe we'll do some more writing on this as it comes out. But this idea that we live in a world that tells us to do our best, and at the exact same time tells us our best is not good enough. You know, we have memories when we think about doing our best. We have memories of a coach or a high school music teacher or a college professor, whatever, they, shouting out, do your best, do your best. And then somewhere along the way, we get evaluated and it's like, hey, your best isn't good enough. And it just creates this weird paradigm where we actually get stuck in feelings of guilt and feelings of shame, and it can halt our progress. Like, it seems weird that the more we focus on trying to do our best, the more we actually maybe hinder ourselves because we get told our best is not good enough.
That's so sad when you think about it, really. I mean, as you said, that dichotomy of being told to do one thing, and then when you do it, it's not good enough to be done. I mean, it makes me sad. And when I think of my grandkids now that are just starting out and going to school, and like you said, they're going to be taught to do their best. And at some point, as you rightly say, somebody's going to say, you should be trying harder than that.
Yeah, it's this kind of new idea too that I don't think, I mean, that's why I'm looking into it. And as I work with people, it's fascinating that I will ask them oftentimes to say, okay, from the time you woke up this morning to right now, did you do your best? And everybody gets this yucky look on their face. Like, they start to scowl at themselves. And I'll stop them and say, what are you thinking of? And they will immediately list all the things that they forgot to do or didn't do, or they even start and say, actually, I hit my snooze alarm 4 times and I didn't get up and I didn't shower this morning. Something about this idea of did you do your best immediately causes people to think of what they didn't do. And really the idea is that the concept of being our best is really immeasurable. There's no such thing as best because we can continually grow and we continually progress. And so my whole idea is we've got to help people get rid of the shame of best thinking, which causes us to think of where we failed or messed up or made mistakes, rather than really seeing where did we succeed? Where did we make progress? You probably see that with the authors that you work with. So many people that sit down to write a book, and I certainly felt this, we get so afraid of, okay, I don't really have anything to say, or we write something and then we go back and we look at it and go, oh no, that's not good enough, or that's not strong enough, or I should have said it this way. And pretty soon we're stuck in the first paragraph of our introduction and we're stuck in neutral and we can't step on the gas and produce a book because we want it to be the best book possible. And we just get stuck, run out of gas, sitting on the edge of the road, and the book never makes it.
I know that feeling far too well.
Sure.
Yes, I mean, I've gone through that myself, that I think that, I don't give myself credit often for what I've done because I'm always looking, I've done that. Okay, let's move on to the next thing, which has to be bigger and better. And as you were talking about that, I could feel people's guilt and shame because they feel guilty that they hit the snooze button 4 times and they didn't get up when they should have, and they didn't do what they felt they should have done. Listeners, you may remember I interviewed Jackie Simmons, and she talked about getting out of shouldville. So every time I say the word should, I think of Jackie, and it's like, get out of using the word should because there's no should about it. We should all over ourselves.
Yeah,
we shouldn't be doing that.
And you know what? Everything about focusing on our best actually produces that should language where we should all over ourselves, because there's always something more we could have done. There's always another step we could have taken or some other way that we could have spent our time. And so as you and I jump from thing to thing, we often get caught in kind of a hustle for worthiness or a hustle for goodness. If we are measuring it in such a way that we can only see where we messed up, the mistake that we made. I remember a woman that I worked with for quite some time. She went through a really rough childhood and a really rough kind of upbringing, but found a great marriage. But she struggled with overwhelming anxiety. She couldn't get herself to even talk to just people that she knew. She just panicked and she struggled. And so we really worked on this idea of what are you measuring? And she definitely had in her mind kind of a perfectionist, I've got to be the best mentality. And it just shut her down. And so we worked on this idea. And one of the things that I help people to do in looking at this is I will ask them first, like, I'll say, Susan, how long would it take you to drive to the horizon? And I don't know if you want to go ahead and answer that, but how long would it take you to drive to the horizon?
I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I know my husband always loves to ask, what's the meaning of life? But I've never been asked about driving to the horizon. I've seen it from the airplane.
Sure. But what most people will come up with is very quickly like, well, you'll never get there, because as soon as you reach the horizon you think you're trying to get to, you will, because it's round, because it's circular, you're never going to get there. And so we talk about, well, if we can't ever get there, then maybe we need to measure something that we can get to. So I start talking to people about, well, let's measure something that's important to you or something that's connected to your value system, so we can shut off this shame and have you start seeing, instead of asking yourself, did I do my best, and only seeing where you messed up or where you thought you messed up. Let's change that. And so as I was working with her, I was encouraging her to come up with a new way of measuring her life and her success, especially in this area of wanting to conquer her fears and her anxieties and her huge fear of making mistakes. And so she tells me the story. She went to the Grand Canyon and she was enjoying the Grand Canyon with her family, and they happened to stop in the gift shop, and she saw the t-shirts hanging on, and the t-shirts said, "Go Grand." And for some reason, that phrase just stuck in her mind. And she came back and she said, "Jim, that's the kind of life I want to live. I want to go grand." And I said, well, what if you started measuring yourself that way? So she began to ask herself, as she was participating in events or situations where she was typically scared, how did I go grand? And she began to measure the efforts that she made to reach out and extend herself. And I'll never forget, she came in and told me about this huge success that she had gone to this huge formal banquet for work. She was dressed up and everything, and she found herself nursing a drink in the back corner of the ballroom. Her husband was up mingling. There were all these guests mingling and talking and shaking hands and vibrant conversation everywhere. And she was sitting all alone in the back of the room. And then she had that thought of, wait, I'm here to go grand. And she began to think about, what have I done? What can I do to go grand? She got up from the table and she began to interact with people, and and it was transformative for her. As I work with people and get them to explore their values and the boundaries that they have for their life and who they want to be, they start to ask questions like, how was I brave today? How was I bold? What good did I do? How was I authentic? How was I kind? Or even if we're working on a specific attribute, like maybe I want to be a more compassionate person, we'll measure compassionate instead of how did I do at the end of the day, which is going to be answered by should questions. Well, I should have been nicer to Susan, and I should have been kinder to my wife, or I snapped at my kids, or I yelled at the dog, or whatever. When we ask the question, how was I compassionate today? Our brain naturally moves away from shame and focuses on examples of compassion in our own day, in our own life. And so it's really fun work to see people start shaping and measuring their life by what they really want to see.
That's
rather
beautiful.
than some measurable best.
I really like that, because I was just going to ask you if there was some kind of formula to measure, but it sounds as if you come up with your own word that you want to measure yourself. Or do you have like a list of words that people could pick that they sort of relate to? Like this woman, obviously, grand meant something to her. Or, as you said, courage or courageous or bold. Can people pick their own word? Talk to us about how that happens.
I usually encourage people, and you can go on Google today and you could just Google values list, and you'll come up with, like every Google search, 50 million hits or whatever, but just a list of words that are values. And boy, one of the challenging exercises is going through and picking the ones that matter most to you. So the ones that drive your life. So I remember one time I did this activity, and boy, pretty much for me, the same values come up. They're gratitude, work and personal responsibility, and perseverance. So as I looked at these values lists and said, what do I really want to be known as? Or how do I tend to live my life? Or what gets me most excited? Or I joke with people, what movies make me cry? And for me, it's always the underdog who wins at the end, And so why not measure that? And so like for me, I'm going to measure, how was I grateful today? I know after I finish this interview, I'm going to think of all the things I didn't do or the things I didn't say. But if I finish this interview and I say to myself, how was I grateful? I'm going to think about ways that I was grateful. Or if I'm working on a project, maybe say to write my second book, if I think about, I should have written 10 more pages or whatever, did I do my best today? How did I do? I'm going to think of all the things I did wrong. But if I say to myself, because I value hard work and responsibility, I'll say, what activities did I engage in that showed responsibility towards producing my next book? And I'm going to go, oh, I did this, and I made that post on social media, and I finished this chapter, and I edited this part. Again, the whole focus is shifting away from things that are should statements and shame and guilt. So usually values is the best way to do that. And people tend to resonate with the value. And then that value becomes something you measure.
Oh, I love that. Grateful is one of those words that I've been using a lot now. Being grateful for what you have and not just take things for granted, because you're absolutely right. It's like, what can I be grateful for today? What I've done versus being upset that I didn't finish something that I felt that I should have done. Again, that emphasis on pressure I put on myself, because it sounds as if we're putting the pressure on ourselves. Other people aren't necessarily doing it unless, of course, they're saying, oh, well, this is your deadline and you've got to do it by such a date and you haven't done it. That's something different. But I feel that there are things that I know for me personally that I put pressure on myself to get things done. And if I haven't, I just like, oh, not again,
Yeah.
Oh, well, it'll have to wait until tomorrow because I'm too tired to do it now,
Yeah. Well, and we live in such a negative world too, where there's so much fault finding. And, as you're driving down the roads of life, I mean, so many of the billboards are just full of negative messages. And then we have so much pressure to succeed faster and younger. I think it's almost become a natural thing for us to think about what we didn't do. I don't think it even takes any effort. Everybody that I work with trying to help who wants to be successful or feels like I can't reach my goals, like they don't have any problem thinking about what they're not doing or what they messed up on. I mean, that just naturally pops into their heads. But when you start to challenge them and say, well, wait, but that's not all that happened. Yes, you hit the snooze alarm 4 times today, but let's talk about what good did you do this morning? Sometimes they even talk about the littlest things and they start to light up and they'll go, well, I smiled at my wife and we shared some tea together. And then we had a joke together and it was a nice conversation for about 20 minutes before I headed off to work. They'll even remember like I let somebody in when they were merging in front of me instead of getting mad. I spent a little time talking to the administrative assistant instead of just rushing off to my office. Even these little tiny things where then people start to feel like, whoa, I'm living a wholehearted, authentic life. If I want to be kind, I'm being kind. And rather than that natural tendency to immediately see the negative, we're now training our brain to see, oh, I'm living true to my values. I'm being authentic. I'm being kind, or whatever other values drive us.
I know that one of the things that you and I had talked about earlier, and that was the imposter syndrome. Talk to us about how you work with people to overcome that.
Boy, that's a great question. I don't know that I have all the answers, and I love all the work that many are doing on this particular topic. I personally believe that each one of us experiences that to some degree or another. I think if we go to the work of Brené Brown, where she talks about shame, for me, that's where I find the most success in helping people with this. Brené in her work came up with a definition of shame that I find so helpful. And this is how I use it, is that shame is the exquisitely painful feeling or experience that I am flawed, broken, or not enough, and therefore I'm unworthy of love, connection, belonging, or blessings. So this whole idea that we've been talking about is we get ourselves in this world that we live in where we're trying to do a great job at work, or we're trying to be a good spouse, or we're trying to be a good parent or a good community member or a volunteer at our church. And we naturally will be put in situations where we're going to feel like we didn't do enough, or that we weren't smart enough, or that we weren't talented enough, or that not enough thinking is so prevalent in our world today. But that shame, and then we feel like we don't deserve success, or we don't deserve the blessings or the rewards that come from it. Hence, we feel like an imposter. So what we do in that is we combat the shame by stepping away from it, measuring things that are measurable, like going grand, or being all in or being authentic or compassionate, we start focusing away from the should thinking that you mentioned earlier. And we start moving towards, hey, I'm a really nice guy. I was really kind today. Or we were talking about gratitude. My motto is think to thank. Like, I'm doing really well at seeing my blessings and expressing thanks to the people that do things for me. So we're shifting away from what the world tells us we should be, which is really never going to be enough, to how do I measure my own life and the wholehearted person I'm trying to be.
Wow. Wow. It's taking my breath away every time you say something. And I love that quote that you gave from Brene Brown. I think that's beautiful. And I want to listen to that over again because it was so profound. And I know she is. And she makes tough subjects easy to understand and relatable. Sure. Yes. That's what I love about how she talks about life, and she's so authentic.
And I've been
so it's a pleasure to listen to her. Yes.
Boy, it's been such a humbling experience to have been. I came across her work some years ago and learned that there was a way that you could become certified to help spread the word. And boy, so humbled back in 2018 to be accepted by her group to be trained as a certified Daring Way facilitator. Because I think down deep within all of us is a desire to be wholehearted, to be authentic, to not feel like a stranger or an imposter in our own lives, but really feel like we can show up, be brave, be awkward. That's something she says, show up, be brave, be awkward, be seen, and be okay with the fact that there's nobody that's ever lived on this earth. Any one of us, like if we look around, not one of us is perfect. Not one of us is free from mistakes. So let's show up with our awkward, brave selves and do what we're capable of doing. And I believe that each one of us has something unique to offer and something to add to make the roads of this life more beautiful.
Very much so. And I'd never sort of use brave and awkward together. They wouldn't be sort of two adjectives that I would necessarily have thought to use together. But yeah, I mean, it just conjures up all these images. And you're right, we do often feel awkward if we're in a situation that is so unfamiliar. And many times, how often does that happen to our listeners that they're in that situation? I mean, even just publishing a book there's an awkwardness about it because you don't know what you don't know. I love sort of explaining in as simplest terms as possible what the process is, that you're going through so that you feel as comfortable as you can. But you rightly said the first time around, you didn't know what you didn't know. And then by the time you did the second one, oh, yeah, I know what I'm doing now. I'm a little more in charge of it, in control. What I love is that I want to teach my authors basically how to fish so that they can do things on their own, which may not necessarily be the best for business, but
sure.
But yes,
just a second, like that I've learned that if I'm feeling awkward, then I'm on the cusp of doing something brave. I remember in writing my first book, I was told that, you really need to have someone write a foreword for your book. And how do you choose somebody to write the foreword? And they told me, well, the best people to write the foreword for your book would be like a New York Times bestselling author or like someone like with a lot of credentials or whatever. I remember the awkwardness of going, well, I don't have anybody in my immediate circles who's a New York Times bestselling author or whatever. And I remember, how am I going to do this? And so in that awkwardness and fear, I just sat down and started making a list. But I decided to do something different because I wanted the awkwardness to kind of lead me to be brave. I decided to write down the names of everybody that came to my mind that I was sure would say no, that would immediately reject me, that would say no, because I thought, well, I'm going to have to be awkward. It's going to be weird reaching out to somebody who's famous, who's, successful. And I'm going to feel awkward because I've never done anything like this. So I started on my list and I'm not going to name any names, but I picked some prominent people and I got rejected. And the awkwardness, so ready to shut me down. But I was brave. I asked. So I went to the next one and the next one. And sure enough, I got to Jason, who wrote the foreword of my first book. He's a New York Times bestselling author 5, 6, 7, 8 times over. I sent the idea to him and he said, wow, I wish I would have thought of this. I'm intrigued. Tell me more. All of a sudden, I'm working with Jason, a New York Times bestselling author that I've never met. I've still never met Jason in person. We've talked and we've emailed a lot and we've instant messaged on Facebook. But Jason agreed to write the foreword of my book. And it was facing the awkwardness. It was recognizing, I didn't get the first person on my list, but I was brave and awkward and I showed up and I was able to do what I wanted to do. And I love what he wrote and I loved the experience of working with Jason as part of writing that forward. So when we're brave and we're awkward, the awkwardness is probably our signal that we're being brave. And so don't shut down in that moment. Keep going, go grand, be brave, be awkward, and show up with all you've got.
I think that's incredible because, yes, it's the rejection that we fear so often. And I did exactly the same as you. I wanted Seth Godin to write me a testimonial for my Riches and Niches, how to make it big in a small market. And he agreed. And it was all for just asking. And I think it's just in the ask. When people ask me to do it, I was like, I'm not a New York Times bestselling author, but I'm an international bestselling author. Never quite made the New York Times, but still, I see it as a privilege and an honor to be able to do that for another author, that if my name can help them sell some books, I'm thrilled to pieces. So, Jim, we talked so much about so many different things, and I have a feeling that our listeners would like to find out more about your services and how they can get in touch with you. How can they do that?
Well, Susan, thank you for asking, and thank you for this experience. It's been delightful to visit with you. I love what you're doing and appreciate the part you've played in helping my books come to be. Best place to reach me would be on drivinglessonsforlife.com. That's drivinglessonsforlife.com or jimrjacobs.com. Please feel free to look me up. You can also find me on social media by those same names, Driving Lessons for Life or Jim R. Jacobs. And I would love to hear from you. Call me for a free consultation. Let me know if you're interested. I'll send you an ebook for your listeners. I'd be happy to send an e-copy of my first or second book to those who listen to the podcast and reach out and let me know that they listened. I'd be happy to send a complimentary ebook.
That's very generous.
For Life. If I can help others to feel successful in producing their book, please reach out. I'm happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, that's very generous. Thank you. And as you know, we always end off with a golden nugget. So if you were to leave our listeners with a golden nugget, Jim, what would that be?
I would just kind of reiterate maybe what we've already said, which is look inside and really look at what drives you in terms of your values or your beliefs or who you want to be, and then make the commitment to show up and be that, and then measure yourself by that. How was I brave today? How did I show up today? How was I authentic today? How did I go grand? Focus on what you are doing. Your brain will naturally pick out what you're not doing. Look to measure and start measuring what you did do, what good you did do, what you did accomplish. And I promise you, it'll start to help the shame go away. You'll still be awkward, but you'll show up with more brave, more courage, and it'll be easier in the momentum to get things done. You'll be stepping on the gas and really heading in the right direction.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. It was a pleasure to have you here. And thank you all for taking time out of your precious day to listen to this interview. And I sincerely hope that it sparked some ideas you can use to sell more books. Here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.
The time is now to take action and finally build your book-selling empire. And the great news is that Susan is here to help you. Visit bookmarketingmentors.com and sign up for a free 15-minute book marketing strategy session with Susan. She'll help you discover your first steps to marketing and selling your book. Only those who take action are rewarded, so visit bookmarketingmentors.com, and we'll see you again next week.